I began as a skeptic as well. In fact, I looked at this site for 20 years before I ever went there. And when I finally went, I went with the #1 Ark researcher alive in the world today, took my whole film crew. We were there 10 days. I walked all over that structure. We filmed it from the bow to the stern, from side to side.
Now, Rick,
And
this is like when was this? When did you do this?
I've been going for 2 years.
So this is very recently, yeah.
Yeah, and I really document everything I do. If I can't footnote it, I'm not interested in it.
Before we get into our conversation, my name is Eric Metaxas, and this channel exists to bring you a biblical perspective on today's news, culture, and hot-button issues. If you're new here or not, welcome, and be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you are notified when new videos get posted. Right now, I get to talk to Rick Renner, who is a friend of the program, and who writes fascinating books. Rick Renner, welcome to the program.
I'm so glad to be with you, and I'm glad to be a friend of the program.
It's hard to sum up what you do, but let me just say, you write about things that are, it's not normal, it's not average, it's very, very exciting. This book that I want to talk to you about, brand new book, I mean, even the title is just crazy interesting. It's World Before the Flood. Fallen angels, folks, you listening? Fallen angels, giants, monsters, and the world before the flood. How the events of Noah's Ark and the flood are relevant to the end of the age, which, by the way, that would be this week. So, Rick, just give us the nutshell, because, you know, people are just tuning in. They don't know about you or the book. What is in the book? How does it relate to the Ark, fallen angels, giants, monsters? What are you talking about?
Well, the first chapter of the book is called The Rediscovery of Noah's Ark. And in 1948, in the lower mountains of Ararat, there was a big earthquake. And when that earthquake took place, the form of a ship appeared. Then in 1958, they were doing aerial photographs of the area to make new photographs, new maps, because it was right on the border of Iran and Russia was nearby, and they just felt like they needed new maps. And this image of this ship became very prominent again. And they, at that time, began to study it. And Eric, it really is the ruins of Noah's Ark, and it's not on Mount Ararat. And the Bible never says it was on Mount Ararat.
It says in the mountains of Ararat.
In the mountains of Ararat. And at the time that the flood took place, Mount Ararat, as we know it today, probably didn't even exist, because it's a stratovolcano.
I just always have to clarify. I've heard a lot about the supposed discovery of Noah's Ark. But I come to these things with some healthy skepticism, because a lot of people claim a lot of things. Christians are unfortunately not exempt from gilding the lily and exaggerating and getting all excited about stuff that is just not right. And then you find out it's not right, and you're like, oh, well. So, but when you say that this is real, that's different for me, because I know you and your track record. If Noah's Ark has genuinely been discovered, that is monumentally important news. And you're saying, yes, that's true.
It is. And I'll tell you that I began as a skeptic as well. In fact, I looked at this site for 20 years before I ever went there. And when I finally went, I went with the #1 Ark researcher alive in the world today, took my whole film crew. We were there 10 days. I walked all over that structure. We filmed it from the bow to the stern, from side to side.
Now, Rick, this is like when was this? When did you do this?
I've been going for 2 years.
So this is very recently, yeah.
Yeah, and I really document everything I do. If I can't footnote it, I'm not interested in it.
Where
if I can't really prove it, I'm not going to write it.
What country are we talking about? No, today it's a very difficult area of the world. So what country currently claims ownership of this mountain?
It is in the eastern mountains of Ararat, which is in eastern Turkey. And Eric, what's really interesting, which is now called Turkey yet, has a new name. If you study what the ancient writers wrote about Noah's Ark and the ruins, they said that as they traveled the Silk Road, that if you just went down the mountain from the Silk Road, you could visit the ruins of Noah's Ark. Well, guess what is above that site?
Well, excuse me, who said that? Who wrote that?
Ancient writers, many ancient writers who traveled the Silk Road wrote about departing from the Silk Road and going down to the ruins of the Ark. And honestly,
Give us the names of some of these writers, for example.
oh, they're all in the book, and I would have to open my book and read it to you. There's so many of them.
Irenaeus,
Josephus,
Origen,
Tertullian, Origen. I mean, the list is long, long, including modern explorers. Now, in more recent years, people have been claiming that they saw it on Mount Ararat. It's not there. It's just not true. It is physically, scientifically impossible.
People will say stuff, and the fact is, folks, it's not what you want to be true. It's what actually is true. And since God is a God of truth, you don't have to be afraid of whatever that is. Whatever it is, and God is in that. He's in the truth. And so a lot of people get all invested emotionally in this or that. It is what it is. You don't have to be afraid of I mean, if something turns out not to be Noah's Ark, you go, okay, praise the Lord. We don't want to, we don't have to fake it. But you are convinced, and again, this is why I take this so seriously, Rick, because number one, I trust you because I know that you take this stuff very seriously. Number two, this is monumental. This is not like, oh, we discovered, a seal ring of Hezekiah, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I've written about that in my book, Is Atheism Dead? But this is gigantic level of importance. It doesn't really get bigger than have we discovered Noah's Ark. And when you mentioned earlier, I'd never heard this before, that there was an earthquake in 1948. How strange, because let's face it, God reveals things when he wants to reveal things. So to me, the idea that in 1948 there's an earthquake and then suddenly we have the ability suddenly now to see Noah's Ark where we didn't before. We didn't have aerial photography before the 20th century. I mean, it feels like end time stuff. It just does. Bull markets turn everyone into a stock market genius. Bear markets reveal who truly is. If your portfolio isn't hedged, you're gambling. A single market correction could wipe out years of gains. For nearly a decade, my friends at Noble Gold Investments have helped investors diversify by adding gold to their portfolios. Gold may help you preserve your upside potential and limit your downside risk. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com and learn how easy it is to incorporate gold into your investment strategy. noblegoldinvestments.com.
In 1948, it appeared in the month of May, the same month that Israel was reestablished as a nation.
Why does that not surprise me, Rick?
It's like two prophetic messages from heaven to us. But Eric, I was a real skeptic about this, but when I went there and saw it, my skepticism left. And when I read all the reports, the ERT scans, the ground penetrating radar, you can actually see 3 levels in that structure. You can see compartments and rooms, and there is a central tunnel that runs through the very middle of it that is not completely filled in. I mean, it is really amazing. And now every year they have a symposium on Noah's Ark, which is held in Turkey, in eastern Turkey, and all the speakers are scientists. It's geologists, archaeologists, and they're all there to discuss this site, which is called the Derupanar site. That's the official name of it. But that's just chapter 1 of the book. Why did God send the flood? That's really what the book is about. Jesus said in Matthew 24:37, as it was in the days of Noah, and of course you're a Greek, the Greek words for as it was is the word husper. It means exactly as it was. So Jesus was really prophesying that whatever was happening in the earth before the flood, there is going to be a replication of it in the end of the age, just before the coming of Jesus. So if we want to know what we're going to see between now and the end of the age, then Jesus said we have to turn around and look at what was going on in the world in the days before the flood. And wow, what I found is amazing.
Okay, so the title of the book is Fallen Angels, Giants, Monsters, and the World Before the Flood. When you say fallen angels, giants, monsters, Rick Renner, what are we talking about?
Well, in Genesis chapter 6, it says the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them mates from the women. Well, this is referring to watchers, and the watchers were the angels that God set over the earth after Adam and Eve were evicted from the garden just to watch over mankind. And these angels abandoned their post. Peter writes about it. Jude writes about it. It is well documented in Scripture. And the Bible teaches these angels rebelled against the authority of God. They did the unthinkable, and they came into the earth, and they mated with women, and the women gave birth to giants. And the word giants in the Old Testament is the word Nephilim. That's a popular word these days. It's from the word nephal, which means to fall. So they were fallen. It was also used to describe people's response to these giants. People collapsed, they fell when they saw them. They were monstrous, monstrous creatures. And in addition to what we know from the Bible, there are extra biblical writings that are really very important. Now, they're not Bible, but they're serious and they're old.
Like what?
The Book of Enoch.
The Book of Enoch.
Now,
Okay.
the Book of Enoch is not biblical, but it was found in its entirety in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Book of the Giants, it was found in its entirety in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we're talking about very ancient, very authoritative works. And guess what, Eric? During the time of Jesus, the Book of Enoch was really popular among the Jews. Now, Jude, who is Jesus' brother, when he was writing the book of Jude, he quotes directly from the Book of Enoch. Well, that gives a lot of credibility to the Book of Enoch, at least to the first 36 chapters. And most scholars believe the first 36 chapters are the oldest part of that book. And in those chapters, it describes that nefarious moment when these angels came together and swore an oath together. There were 200 of them, and they decided they would rebel against the authority of God and do the unthinkable. And their nefarious actions are described in Genesis chapter 6. And that, my friend, is the root of all mythology. It all comes from Genesis chapter 6.
This stuff is freaking me out, and that's good. You just said that the watchmen, these were angels on the earth right before the flood, who rebelled at that time. In other words, we're not talking about some time before time when all the angels in heaven rebelled or whatever, but you're saying, because this is where I get a little confused, but I'm also fascinated, that angels rebelled in human history, that these angels who were here rebelled against God's will and became fallen at that time?
They sure did. It was one particular group of angels. There were 200 of them. We even know the name of them because his name is mentioned in the book of Enoch. It's very amazing. And when you read the book of the giants, which which really chronicles this event, it says that when the Nephilim were born, these giants, at first they were so massive, they began to eat all the produce of men, the animal, the vegetation.
It says this in the book of Enoch.
No, this is in the book of the giants.
In the book of the giants, okay. Which you said is in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
It's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Is that amazing?
Yes.
And when they basically had already eaten everything, then they turned to cannibalism. They began to eat flesh, drink blood, and that is the reason why when Noah and his family came off the ark, the first law that God gave to man was, let's not ever do this business of eating flesh and drinking blood again. That was the first law that God gave to Noah. Now, that is really weird.
Now, wait a minute.
That would be the first law.
You mean of eating flesh and drinking blood, we're allowed to eat meat. So what do you mean by that?
Cannibalism.
Oh, okay.
It's a reference to cannibalism. It was telling to Noah, let's not go back to where we just came from. But all of this is recorded in the book of Enoch, also in the book of the giants, and there's something else really important. It's not just fallen angels, giants, it's also monsters. You know, if you look at ancient history, and I'm a student of ancient history, all ancient cultures tell basically the same bare bones of mythology.
Right.
They have the same pantheon of the gods. They have the same monsters, the same beasts and creatures, even though these cultures never had contact with each other. They all tell the same stories. And these were not just primitive people with overactive imaginations. We're talking about the people who built the pyramids and people who had science and philosophy. These were brilliant people, and they weren't just given to overactive imaginations. They were speaking from an echo of past history that they could remember.
But obviously the obvious logical questions that emerge here, and they're good questions, folks. You have to have these questions, and you may not get answers, but if you don't have the question, you're not thinking clearly, because you would say, normally, I don't understand how angels could reproduce with humans. That doesn't track for me, right? Because it doesn't lead to, a chimera. It doesn't lead to beasts or whatever. That doesn't happen. So you could ask the same question, how is that possible? Now, I'm assuming, Rick, that you don't know and I don't know, but you're saying that that's what it says.
Well, I have the very same questions. And another question people ask is, how is this possible? Because God said everything would produce after its own kind.
Right.
Well, that was the original plan. But these angels violated the laws. And in some way, which we do not understand, they really did this. And Eric, all the ancient church fathers speak in unison about this subject. I'm not making this stuff up. And in fact, when I did my research for my book, what shocked me was how much volumes of research there was done by the early church fathers and by Jewish sages who wrote very freely about this subject. And they all basically wrote the same thing. And they didn't all live at the same time in the same place. But they all had the same agreement that this took place.
Well, look, this is so fascinating. And I'm always fascinated. I repeat myself. Like when I discover something like this, what you're talking about here, what I don't get is why haven't people written about this before? I mean, do you have any sense of that? Because you wrote a book a couple of years ago, the Christmas book, and I have the same question. Like, how astonishing that you find this stuff and that you write about it. Why haven't people put this together before? Now, I'm sure some have, but it sounds like you're doing it on another level.
Well, some have, to be honest, but I would call most of those people, they're kind of on the fringe, and they write about a lot of weird stuff. But I'm not on the fringe.
Not that this isn't very weird, but it's kind of funny. It is a tricky thing to know where that line is, right? Where, because there are people that they'll accept everything and anything. They'll be talking about how the earth is flat. Now, by the way, if you're listening to this program and you believe the earth is flat, let me just be real clear. Not only is it not flat, but if you continue to talk about that, you don't have permission to watch this program anymore because it's just unbelievable. It's so funny. The other day I was reading, there was a Greek in the 3rd century BC who figured out the circumference of the earth. Almost exactly. Eratosthenes. So this is like, it's not a new thing that the earth is, it's a sphere. The ancient Greeks already knew this and they could figure it out from Greece. They didn't need to go up in an airplane. Now, how crazy, Rick Renner, that in 1948, Israel is born. There's an earthquake that reveals the Ark, and we discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls that contains the Book of Enoch and the Book of the Giants. So it seems to me like this is God's end time plan, that he's revealing these things now in these last days. He could have revealed it any other time, but he chose not to. He chose to reveal it now. It's exciting.
It's very exciting. And as I said in the last segment, Jesus said, if we want to know what's going to happen between now and the end of the age, we have to turn around and see what was happening in the world before the flood. Well, before the flood, a lot of nefarious things were happening. There was transmutation. People were crossing boundaries that they were not supposed to cross. Monstrous things were being created. Well, what are we seeing today? Today we're dealing with transhumanism, transgenderism. We're breaking all kinds of boundaries and all kinds of violations. We're really living in a time when it seems a lot of these strange things are being replicated. And Eric, a really interesting thing is in Luke 21:11. It's a verse that scholars have never known what to do with, and they've never translated it correctly because they don't know what to do with it. And in Luke 21:11, Jesus said, in the end of the age, the very end of the age, there will be fearful sights and great signs shall be from the heavens. Well, in Greek, the word fearful sights is the word phobotron. The word phobotron is a derivative of phobos, which is the word fear. When it becomes phobotron, it's something fearful, and it is only used one way in ancient Greek culture, just one way. It describes monsters. That's what it describes. And so if you want to translate Luke 21:11 correctly, Jesus said at the end of the age, there will be the appearance of monsters. And then he adds, great signs shall be from the heavens. And he uses a little preposition apo. It describes something coming down out of the heavens. So according to Jesus, and now this is wide open for speculation, in the very end of the age, you're going to see monstrous developments in the earth. It will look like monsters. And something's going to be coming out of the heavens, apo, directly from the heavens. People are going to be talking about it.
It's so fascinating that when Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah, that does mean a lot. But what you just said about monsters, about signs in the heavens, and again, we don't know exactly what that means. That can mean many things. But I think studying this stuff the way you do is important. And you talk about things that, honestly, Rick, usually it's just too mysterious for people to get into, so they just go past it. But you, by the grace of God, have the ability to kind of reveal some of this stuff. And I know others have, but not, as far as I can tell, with the clarity that you bring to it. And I think even the clarity you just brought to the discovery of Noah's Ark, that is something that I have honestly sloughed off as, yeah, probably not. I don't know. Who knows? But you've been there. You've actually been there.
I have been there. But, Eric, in a certain way, I think you and I are similar. You are a real chronicler of history, and that's kind of what I do. I just dive into history to see what I can find, and it brings flavor and it brings understanding. I mean, there's a lot of mysteries in the Bible that don't need to be mysteries, but people don't know how to dig to find the answers. And I think that's one of my gifts. I know where to go, I know how to dig, and I'm not afraid to ask the questions. And you have to be willing to ask questions, to go below the surface, to mine everything you can so you can really see the full picture. And I believe that's part of my gift.
Now, we just have a couple of minutes left. When you went to the site of Noah's Ark, what do you see? Do you see wood? Do you see something that looks like the Ark? What are you looking at?
Well, the best view of the Ark is from the view of a drone. And when you see it from a drone, you don't have a question about what you're looking at.
Yeah.
When you actually get to it, it is so enormous. I mean, when you look at what God told Noah to do, it is massive. It's 300 cubits long. It's exactly 515 feet long. And you can walk from the bow all the way to the stern. And guess what? It is not a barge like people say. It is exactly in the form of an ancient ship. And if you go down in the valley below, there are massive drogue stones. Drogue stones were the stones they hung from the side of ships to balance a ship in bad weather. These drogue stones are bigger than a car, and they have found 26 of them. And if you follow them, you understand that as the ark began to slow and the waters begin to calm down, Noah and his boys begin to cut those stones, and you can follow those stones like breadcrumbs. And it will lead you right to where the ark turned and landed in the lower mountains of Ararat, just next to today the Iranian border. It really is there. And one more thing I haven't told you is not far from the place of the landing. And by the way, that is the name of that site. The ancient name is the place of the landing. And not far from there is a huge sacrificial stone with a channel cut right across the top of it. And the local Kurdish village, which has lived there for thousands of years, they say that that is where Noah offered his first sacrifice to God when they left the ark. It is amazing. I wish I could just take you there, Eric. You would be shocked.
Did they find the name Ham carved into the wood? Ham was here? Nothing like that? We're out of time. We're out of time. Rick, got to have you back. Got to continue the conversation. I'm really looking forward to reading this book. I can't tell you. Folks, it is called Fallen Angels, Giants, Monsters, and the World Before the Flood. Rick Renner is the author. Rick, God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.